Oh, hello there. Yes, well, back to school, back to reality. Yes, whatever happened to them? Anyway, yes, today we're going to talk about education because I have to, well, insert myself in it over the next few weeks or months or years, possibly. Yes. Anyway, a couple of education stories in yesterday's Sunday Telegraph, which I thought we'd delve into, and it just goes to show how people, despite the fact that they know everything about education because they went to a school once, that people really don't know anything about it at all. So the yesterday's comment in the Tory graph was, Labour must stand up to the education unions. If the government bows to their baleful pressure, the children will suffer. Who suffer most will be from those from the poorest backgrounds. Yes, think of the poor children. Think of the white working class, as we do whenever it's convenient. Yes, and we had the glorious minor MP from a minor political party talking about minors. See what I did there? It was fun, wasn't it? Yes, anyway, Richard Tice, who said any excuse for idle teaching unions to do less work. Basic maths and good English is essential for our young children to develop successfully. Yes. So anyway, the crux of the Telegraph piece is that the teaching unions want to get rid of some of the more very, very useful testing that gets done, in particular times tables. Now, you might think it's important for children to learn times tables. I don't think it is, personally, okay? Because of the work that I do, I have to basically refresh my memory of GCSE maths every year, and I am always struck by how useless about half of it is. A lot of it is really useful, but a lot of it is completely useless, other than just as an abstraction. To learn the long side of a right-angled triangle using Pythagoras' theorem is all well and good, but if in real life you're faced with measuring how long the long side of a triangle is, you're going to get a ruler. That's the way that one's going to work. I don't have any problems with theoretical maths, but for God's sake, don't try and persuade me that getting children at the age of 8 or so to learn by rote their times table is magically a good thing. What Richard Tice doesn't know, and what the Daily Telegraph also doesn't know, because they can't be bothered to find out, is that a lot of these testing regimes that people like Nick Gibb et al., yes, and some of their very short-lived education ministers from the last 14 years, one of the reasons why they brought in this stuff was simply to force primary schools to become academies, because lots and lots of secondary schools became academies, basically got taken over by the private enterprises. That'll be good. And primaries weren't particularly doing it, so they introduced a whole range of new testing measures for schools to fail on. And whenever they failed, they'd have to become an academy. Isn't that good? Isn't that good? Yes, well, it's a way of selling off state assets, which of course is the business that Richard Tice is really in, not worrying particularly about working class young people not knowing their 7 times table. But of course they can always go into private education, I suppose, if their parents scrimp and save. And that brings us on to the meat of the matter today, because also in the Telegraph we had this: government private schools VAT raid could, and that's going to do a lot of heavy lifting here, cost the taxpayer 1.8 billion, yes. Parents who are forced out of the sector are likely to work less or even quit jobs, according to think tank research. And I thought, oh my goodness, I've got to have a bit of a look at that. Yes, especially after Toby Young decided to get in there. Yeah, the government's VAT raid on primary schools risks costing the taxpayer up to 1.8 billion. Yeah, up to. It's always great, isn't it? Yeah. If you use this product, you can save up to 20%. 1% is up to. I know my percentages. Anyway, as parents cut their work hours once their children move to the state sector, a report has found. Now, you might think that's a bit odd. Yes, it really, really is. So let's actually go there, right? Okay. Now, first up, it's from the Adam Smith Institute, who aren't actually based at Tufton Street. They're based about 2 minutes walk away, so maybe it doesn't count. Yes, of course it does. For those of you that don't know, the Adam Smith Institute was one of those Thatcherite economic think tanks that is very strange, because it completely ignores what Adam Smith had to say about a whole range of things. And I'm not going to say definitely that they will basically write whatever you want them to. But this report certainly has a vague feeling about that. So it's called Tuition Tensions, Labour Markets and Educational Taxes by Maxwell Marlowe. Yes, well, let's have a look at Maxwell Marlowe. Okay, Maxwell Marlowe is the Director of Research at the Adam Smith Institute. Yeah, I think it's just him. They do like directors and associate directors of research when there's just like one person, but leaving that aside, before working as at the Adam Smith Institute, he worked as Public Affairs and Communications Executive at strategic consultancy Hanbury SAS Strategy. Clients he worked with including leading financial institutions, crypto firms, fundraising platforms, and transport providers. Yeah, so he lives in the real world. Yeah, Maxwell graduated with a first-class honours BSc in Politics and History from the LSE. Right, where he was also twice consecutive president of the Hayek Society. Yes, we'll come on to him. Whilst at the LSE, blah, 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 blah. Yes, indeed. Now, this, there's a link down below if you particularly want to read it. I did have to chuckle when I was looking at it yesterday. I'm not going to recommend you read it, but it's incredibly dry and also incredibly meaningless. Okay, one of the problems that I have, amongst the many problems that I have, amongst the humongously large number of problems that I have with economics as a social science, is that it pretends that it's based on a form of rationality, which it just isn't. And that form of rationality is always applied to its subject matter, which is human beings. Okay? Now, Hayek, like most economists, came from a reasonably privileged background, and he assumed that people were independent players from a reasonably comfortable economic background. That's the basis of a lot of the stuff that he wrote about, just being brutal about it. I don't think it's particularly unfair of me to say that. And also, most economists work on the basis that people are rational players, especially thinking about the future, okay? So the problem with this, in particular, okay, is that imagine you have a 3-year-old child, okay, and you say to the 3-year-old child, you can either have this sweet or I'll put this 10 pence in a high savings, interest savings account for you. Which one do you want to go to? Now, according to people like, well, Maxwell, Maxie Baby, whatever, yeah, and Hayek, the child, thinking about their future, will forego the sweet and go for the 10p investment. Now, you can see instantaneously that that's not real. And Maxwell's problem here is that he's managed to, well, basically cook a whole bunch of numbers out of nowhere on the basis of something that people aren't going to do. So, moving on, let's just have a quick look at the executive summary and then I'll say what the problems are. This paper assesses the labour supply implications of imposing VAT and business rates on independent schools, building on prior analysis from short-term thinking. The focus is on how this policy may affect labour supply. No you notice. Dear God, there's no you in labour. For God's sake, man. Anyway, among families transitioning from private to state education, effectively generating a financial windfall for these households. Okay, so in other words, yes, okay, if you aren't going to spend, say, 20k a year on school fees, which is the basic stuff that they're here, they're sort of talking about 20, 25k on average school fees, then therefore you've got that extra money, theoretically, right? Anyway, studies on financial windfalls, lottery winners and inheritance recipients indicate labour withdrawals of 11 to 59%, which is consistent with the well-documented backward-bending labour supply curve. And no you in labour there, but anyway, if you want to read about that, you can read the report. I wouldn't bother particularly, but you can do. These findings suggest that families saving between £300,000 and £500,000 on a lifetime school fees could exhibit similar behaviour, reducing their work hours, exiting the workforce entirely, or retiring earlier than planned. They could be expected to reduce their labour participation by 40% of the labour, with a U finally, required to earn the fees, which would significantly affect the economy and the public finances. Yes. I think you might be seeing where I'm about to go with this. We estimate the VAT on fees could result in a 5 to 25% migration of students from independent to state schools, coupled with a 40% reduction in the labour supply. Conservatively, conservatively only considering a portion of the labour supply that earns school fees. This could result in a direct payroll tax loss of 180 million to 910 million pounds, including broader indirect economic effects, and the total fiscal impact could double somehow, potentially reaching up to 1.8 billion. Yeah. Which I'm sorry is just numbers plucked out of the air. But what Max is saying here is, again, it's that rational player thing. That somebody who shoves their kid into their local secondary school suddenly thinks, oh, well, I'm going to be £300,000 better off over the next 14 years, assuming their child's very small, and therefore I just won't go to work for 2 days a week. Which I don't think people do. I'm sorry, I just don't think people do. Average people don't. Maybe if you are Maxwell and you come from that background, or maybe Hayek, I know he's dead, but you get the idea. Anyway, would think like that. However, you and I don't. I'm thinking, I mean, my child is now in his mid-20s, right? But when he was small, I didn't have the option of working less, right? I worked in a school. I was a school teacher, something I don't do now, although I still teach, all right, okay? So I didn't have an option as such to reduce my hours. It just wasn't something I could possibly do, in the same way that I couldn't realistically increase my hours because, I was a teacher. And perhaps harking back to Richard Tice, perhaps one of the reasons why, for example, teachers can't actually stay in their jobs for more than 5 minutes because it's so bleeding awful, is for that lack of, that lack of ability to make time for yourself. Yeah? The vast majority of teachers only last about 3 years before they're completely burnt out in a system that just doesn't care. Richard, Toby. Anyway, yeah, moving on from that. But that assumes, right, that people will just go, oh, well, I just won't work then, which I think's ridiculous. And especially when we hear about all these hard-working families and they're scrimping and saving to send their children to school. Well, they're not going to magically work particularly less. And okay, if they do, then that's not going to be a 1.8 billion hit to the exchequer. That's a farcical amount. If people are saving 20k a year, there's a good chance that they'll put that back into the economy. I'm sorry, Maxwell, but that's reality. I don't care what you think people will do rationally if it's unlikely they're going to do it. Sorry, just nonsense, absolute nonsense. And yet, once again, you will hear this 1.8 figure bandied about, okay, as if it is an actual thing. But my guess is, because of course from the Adam Smith Institute we just never really know, is that maybe some of those, I don't know, probably educational institutions, maybe some private ones, have decided to bung some money at Maxwell, and he's been told to come up with a big number, which he dutifully has done. But it's a bit of a stretch. Sorry, no. And maybe if those parents actually put their children into state schools, then they would do something about the dreadful state of state education. Yeah, they would make teachers' lives better. They would stop children having to sit next to roped-off areas where the roof might cave in. Yeah, that kind of thing. That might actually be a real economic benefit, mightn't it? Nope, we can't put numbers on that, even though we might try. Anyway, yes, Maxwell. Jesus, what is it with Maxwell's, eh? Anyway, do enjoy. Have a lovely Monday if you can do. I'm, going to work, really. That'll be good, won't it? Yeah. Maybe I could use the money I save for